So we're continuing with modernism, and we looked at Frank Lloyd Wright. Now, Frank Lloyd Wright, this is actually stone, and this, I'm not sure, that might be some concrete there. But he does some concrete castings. He sort of makes these brick forms, these really interesting shapes, and stacks those and experiments with concrete. But we're going to get into reinforced concrete, which is a different way of working with concrete. Now, concrete, if you remember, the Romans invented this. It was called caementa, which is like cement. So it was a mixture of rocks and lime and gravel, and was mixed together and held together. If you remember, lime is the substance from the frescoes with plaster. That's the sort of connective medium. It hardens and it sticks. So that's sort of the secret ingredient in concrete. Concrete and cement are slightly different. At any rate, it's reinforced through fibrous materials or steel rods. Sometimes they use fiberglass. They just don't use resin. Excuse me. They use the concrete to sort of keep the form in place, and it prevents the cracking. And you've seen rebar. That's something you've seen at a construction site. They sell it at Home Depot. It's kind of like a bumpy, finger-sized iron bar. It's been around since the 19th century, and it's poured into a form. So when it's poured into a form, what that means is there's some plywood here, like placed up against this shape. It's poured in place mostly, most of the time. It's poured in place, and so a plywood structure would be built on both sides, and then the concrete would be poured in, and then it would be held in place for a number of days, and then the mold of the forms of the plywood would be pulled away, and then you'd have these beautiful shapes. So part of the beauty of the reinforced concrete is that you can attain some interesting curvature. You can, not such geometric, boring shapes as we know architecture to be. But unfortunately, this went way over budget, and it was a big deal, and it was very controversial. But as you well know, you already know this building, you've already seen this building, it's quite famous, and it was sort of worth it in the long run. So their sails, they're supposed to look like the boats in the harbor. So now we're going to get into postmodernism. There's a reaction to modernism. Everything in the art world in general and architecture in specifically is a reaction to the last thing that happened. And sometimes it's a real erasure or a rebellion, excuse me, against what just happened. But modernism was all these blocky square buildings. We looked at a few of those, but that was just everywhere. And then in the 1980s, that became tiresome. People were tired of the coldness of modernism. Recently, modernism's had a resurgence, and people are embracing it again. But through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, modernism was out, and the idea of postmodernism was the new concept. So it was the hard rectangles of modernism. It was sort of embracing part of it, and then it was a hearkening to the past. So if we look here, we almost have an ancient 2,000-year-old Greek portico here. We have the style of the pillars, we have our post and lintel looking type building, we have the pediment here. We have some decorative elements. Some of these are functional, like this is a little viewpoint, out like a glass box that you can look at things. But for the most part, there's a lot of decorative elements here, which modernism did not embrace. Modernism shunned decoration. It shunned anything that was extraneous and not completely functional. So we have our implied columns and so on. And it's kind of embracing the Baroque in a little bit with the curved portion. We get into Santiago Calatrava, a Spanish architect, the Quadrachi Pavilion at the Milwaukee Art Museum. The Milwaukee Art Museum in Wisconsin, it's a serious museum, and they hired a cutting edge architect. And again, we have the sail motif similar to the Sydney Opera House. We have these interesting design, and also like a movable sun shade. So there's some changeability with this piece. There's a kinetic aspect to it, and you can see the water here on the edge of the lake, and it's meant to again interact with or comment on the ship forms that are right nearby. Zaha Hadid, she passed away just a couple years ago, and she's a really super interesting architect that was doing a lot of cutting edge work. She's an Iraqi born architect, and this is one of her concept drawings. And this is an actual building. Some of her buildings were finished after she passed, but this one is quite nice, and this is in Cincinnati, Ohio. And you can see there's quite a bit of modernism going on here with these blocky, big pieces of concrete, big windows, but it's cut up and it's playful, and then the interior is changeable for different events and different art shows. So it's a dynamic space, it's a dynamic public space, and it's offers some flexibility. So there's some other currents in architecture that have to do with green architecture. Our previous edition had some really interesting green architecture examples. This just has the one of Michelle Kaufman's Glide House, and it's a beautiful piece, it's a beautiful building. But what this is a prefabbed structure that you can purchase and put on a flatbed truck, and it can be shipped to different locations and assembled. So there's less manufacturing. It's not made out of uh, wood that you're purchasing at another location. It's all recycled materials, and it's not all, but a fair amount. And it's got windows that are double paned, and it's got solar panels, and so on. So it's minimalistic and it is green. So they're inexpensive, and then it's some sustainable wood or recycled wood.